Thank you for coming to Book Passage tonight. We're so happy to have you here and for supporting our local independent bookstore. Before we begin, if you could just check that your cell phones are off so we don't have any interruptions, I'd appreciate that. My name is Monica Golden, and I will be hosting this evening's event for you. In the Family Guide to Aging Parents, Carolyn Rosenblatt offers readers valuable advice to handle what lies ahead in legal, financial, and healthcare issues for their aging parents. Rosenblatt is an RN and an elder law attorney. She has founded agingparents.com and aginginvestor.com. She has assisted thousands of aging patients and their families over the last 30 years. Please help me welcome Ms. Carolyn Rosenblatt.
Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Well, I want to welcome you for coming with your questions because I do this backwards from the way some people do it. I take the questions first. But let me tell you first of all why I wrote this book. As a nurse, I had an opportunity to make a lot of visits. I was a home care nurse. I visited people all day at home working for a visiting nurse association. And as a result of that, I came to see the effects of long-term needs that people have. You know, a lot of people have chronic illnesses as they get older, and this puts a burden not only on them, but on everybody around them who's going to deal with how to take care of that. It's costly financially, it's costly physically, it's costly to the family dynamics. So that stayed in my mind. And when I changed careers and went into the practice of law, I practiced right here in Marin County for 25 years. And I had a litigation practice representing individuals, people who got hurt or whatever. And I found also that older people were not treated particularly well by the legal system, especially people who did not have a lot of money. And there's kind of a fantasy about this county that everybody's rich. We're not. The average income for an older person, that doesn't mean their assets, but their income is somewhere around $60,000. And that's the median in this county. It's not, that means there are a lot of people who have more, but there are also an equal number of people who have less. So I saw the need, and I thought, you know, when I retired from combat, all those years of litigation, going to court and being a fighter, I thought, what am I interested in? What would I like to do? And I thought, you know, I want to be helpful to people who have an aging person in their families. And I also want to be helpful to the aging persons themselves because I started to be one. And I had retired at 60, and that was 7 years ago. So my retirement career is really consulting for people who have aging parents, or in financial services, people who have aging clients. The motivation has a lot to do with protecting people. It has to do with preventing elder abuse. It has to do with preventing people from being neglected or harmed because someone doesn't know what to do legally, or doesn't know what to do financially, and even doesn't know what to do physically. My partner is my husband, Dr. Nicole Davis, who is a psychologist. So we bring nursing, law, and psychology to our addressing of these problems. And I think a lot of people that I've consulted with over the years have had some of the same themes in their questions. You know, a lot of the issues have to do with money. A lot of the issues have to do with the dynamics of relationships. And a lot of the issues have to do with where people get into conflict over care. Who's going to take responsibility? What if the person doesn't want it? So that's really the impetus for writing the book. I thought, well, let me take the 35 years of professional experience I have and put it down. I had done another version of a book a few years back and learned a lot about writing and what people want to know about in the interim. So the Family Guide to Aging Parents really represents the culmination of a lot of that I have learned and continue to learn from all of you who have people in your families or neighbors or whoever it is that is aging. So I want to invite you to ask your questions first, and we can talk about what chapters in the book might relate to them. But please feel free. Who's got a question about anything about aging or an aging parent, or neighbor, or friend? You had one, I think.
What if they don't want it?
Okay, don't want care?
Yes.
All right, common problem. And I can tell you a little story about my mother-in-law who's 93. In fact, my husband's not here today because he went down to Palm Desert and surprised her for her birthday. She was so shocked she cried. But that was a nice thing. And you know, she's still really with it. We're very fortunate that she doesn't have any kind of brain disease like dementia. She's able to manage pretty well, but she has resisted help for the longest time. This is a very independent woman. Now, she adapted pretty well to widowhood even after 62 years of marriage. And that's a hard thing to do. But she drives, she does her own grocery shopping, she cooks for herself, she entertains friends, she plays mahjong and cards and all these other different things. But when it came time to addressing the issue she was having with her walking, she didn't want to hear about it. So we went to visit her one day. She takes a place in the beach for a couple of weeks in the summertime, and we fly down and visit her there. So she came out to meet us, to let us in the gate, because we have to get into the parking end of the building, and she was like this. Now, she's got a couple bad knees, but, you know, I'm a nurse. I don't want her to fall, because I know what happens when you do that at that age. You end up with a broken hip in the hospital, and some people never recover. So the first thing I said is, Mom, we are going to look at walkers. And she said, I hate that. That's for old people. She was 92 at the time. In her mind, that's not old people. I said, well, I'll tell you what, do it for me just as a favor, because you might need it in the future. Now, when she was walking normally, not out to the gate, she would hold on to things. She has two bad knees. They were replaced. And the replacement life is not forever. Maybe it lasts 20 years. It's been way more than that. So the knees are starting to go, making it much harder for her to get around. It's not that she doesn't want to get around or that she can't physically move. It's just the knees are bad. It hurts, and she just hasn't got it. But didn't want to walk her, didn't want a cane. So I admit I pushed her. And we went to the rental place at the beach, and I said, how much is it to rent a walker for a week? And they told us. I said, that's fine. And she said, well, I guess that's all right. So we got a wheeled walker, and there's a long strand at the beach with a sidewalk on it, which is very flat and safe. I said, let's see how you do with the walker. So this is without the walker, and this is with the walker. It was phenomenal, what a difference. Now, she will use that occasionally, but she still resists. And this is a problem, because losing independence is the issue. It's fear. That's why people resist. They don't resist because they don't think they need the help, really. They know that they have a problem. Some of them don't. I'll take that back. Some of them don't. They don't recognize it because they have dementia. And that causes them to not see that they're impaired in any way. They're in denial. It's not willful. It's brain disease. But it is, for some people, they actually do not understand because they haven't got the brain power anymore to get that. But for the rest of the people, losing independence has a tail end to it. For older people, especially ones like my mother-in-law, who are in their 80s or 90s, this is long before we had Medicare. This is long before there was the law that exists today to try to keep people safe in nursing homes. This is long before assisted living existed. People went to awful places and were warehoused until they died. Their image of getting old and needing help is that. And if you ever hear this, please don't ever put me in a home. Anybody ever hear that? Swear you'll never put me in a home. Promise you'll never put me in a home. Their image of a home is that awful almshouse from, some English novel. It is a terrible place, and these places did exist. For centuries they did exist. Our tradition from Great Britain and other parts of Europe was to throw people, regardless of what was wrong with them, people who did not have any money, into these awful places where neglect was rampant and people were barely fed. They depended on donations. Those places still exist in some countries. In this country, we have lots of regulations, but in the minds of our elders, that's not what they see. They see terror. They see God's waiting room, as they call it. They see death's door. They see something that means they are likely to lose complete control of their existence. And sometimes, any form of help that we want to provide for them because we think they need it, any form of help is a threat. And it leads to that nightmare that they have in their minds, which you cannot dissuade them from. It's very emotional. And you can't fight emotions with logic, as I'm sure many of you know. But I think that's really the heart of the resistance, is fear. Now, what do you do about it? What do you do about it? Well, we have a bit of a problem because we balance in our society the right to self-determination against the need for protection. And there's a conflict, isn't there? When you think about it. Self-determination, does that mean you can make every stupid decision there is? Sometimes. There is no law against stupid decisions. People make them every day. Older people make them sometimes with increasing frequency, and it's very alarming. But, you know, we have allowing people their independence. Personally, I think we need to step in before it gets out of hand, if we can. If the person is competent, the law does not allow us to force ourselves on anybody. The only time that one can force oneself on another person is if they are a danger to themselves or a danger to others. Then we have a civil code that lets us put them in the hospital or take their freedom away, but we've got to reach a very high standard under the law to take someone's freedom away. We have conservatorship in California, and that is a way where the court says, you're dangerous, you can't take care of yourself, you can't feed yourself, or you're going to set the house on fire because you forget you turned on the stove, whatever it is. If there's enough evidence like that, the court will impose on that person, at the request of either the county, through its attorneys or Adult Protective Services, or through a family member or someone else, they will impose a conservatorship. Now, what is that? It's a rule that appoints a person, one person usually, sometimes two family members, to be completely in charge of that person, either their individual personal freedom, or their money, or both. So we call it conservatorship of the person and conservatorship of the estate. And you can have one or the other. But we've got to reach a very high standard of proof to the court before someone's going to have their freedom taken away. And it's not easy. It also costs money. You've got to hire a lawyer, and it's, you know, pits people against each other. It can be very ugly. My mother, who was mentally ill, was under conservatorship from the time I was young. And I remember having to go testify in court when I was 14, that she was still mentally ill and she was going to make stupid decisions. Well, you know, however the person is that day, that's how the judge decides. And she was on top of it that day. She'd gotten A's in drama in college. Boy, she was a good actress. And what did she do? She went out and wildly spent money, and it went into foreclosure when she bought this house, and she ended up in the hospital, and okay, but she had the right to make that decision because the court was convinced at that time that she was all right, that she could make her own decisions, even dumb ones. So the fear of losing control, the fear of that kind of thing happening, courts getting involved, law enforcement getting involved, all of those things are some of the factors that drive people to resist help. Now, are we able to persuade them? Well, sometimes. I've been working on my mother-in-law for 2 years to kind of give up living by herself. You know, besides the shaky walking, it's getting harder to see. It's getting harder to hear. It's getting harder to bring the groceries in from the car. It's getting harder to drive. She's already given up driving at night. Thank God. Now, mind you, I was a personal injury lawyer for many years, so car accidents are a thing I know a little bit about. I did not want her to cause a crash, but you know, she's still actually a pretty good driver. And she's self-limited her driving at night. Nobody had to ask her. She has macular degeneration, which is an age-related problem that causes the field of vision to be less. And she recognized that and decided it wasn't safe, and she was going to stop driving at night. Well, what does that do? That isolates her at night. She can't go to the movies. She can't go to a program unless somebody else is driving. And there's a chapter on driving in the book, and I wrote that because a lot of people struggle with the driving issue. They really struggle with it. For one thing, if you are driving and you give up driving, someone else has to drive you, unless you live in a place where there's easy access to public transportation, which Marin is not. No matter where you live, if you're used to driving, or the older person in your life is used to driving, and they must stop, somebody's got to figure out how to get them around. Now I want to tell you about that and my grandmother. My grandmother was a wonderful aging person who influenced me in my life a lot. We called her Mimi. Mimi had 23 grandchildren. She was a wonderful, amazing grandmother and a tremendous positive inspiration for me in many ways. But I watched her age, and for a long time she did just great. Her son, my uncle, was a physician. And in those days, doctors thought everybody over 75 was just about dead, so why bother? They didn't mean to be ageist, but they were. And I remember she came up on her 80th birthday, and he had said, well, it's time to stop driving. Now, she belonged to the women's club and the church and the this and the that, and she went all over the place. She was still taking classes at the nearby university at 80. She was still sharp. Dementia hadn't set in yet. But my uncle decided she was 80 and told everybody this was her last, probably her last birthday. And so we had a big party and we celebrated her 80th, and she lived to be 93. Showed him, didn't she? Problem was, he took away her driving privilege and did not make provisions for someone to drive her. And she deteriorated very, very rapidly. She lost her connection to the community. And if there's one thing that helps us age well, it is engagement with our community. Whatever way we like to do that. Some people like it a lot, some people need a little, but we have to stay connected or we start to die inside. And that's what happened. She developed dementia, and it was, pretty soon she really didn't leave her room. And it was sad, and I remember looking at that because I think I might have been a student nurse at the time. And there was something in me that rebelled against that. Sort of, we all worship my uncle the doctor, but how dare he decide when her life would be at its end? And how dare he decide that she didn't need to go anywhere? He didn't really mean to be that way, but that was the way of thinking at the time. We have evolved since then. We have. So if driving is a problem for anyone you know, think about this. Independence is not more important than public safety. Okay? We have a really good Department of Motor Vehicles in California. We have a way that you can, shall I call it, rat somebody out? You can send an anonymous request that the person be re-examined for their driving ability. And I know of some cases where the doctor did it, and I know of some cases where the wife did it, and I know of some cases where another person, a child did it, adult child. They send a request for retesting, re-examination into the Department of Motor Vehicles. They then send a letter to the driver and say there's been a request for retesting, you have to come in. And see, if somebody is pointing that out, they probably are going to flunk the test, which is good. Then they will suspend the driving license or revoke it, I had someone call me on the phone. Remember, I'm a consultant, I get all kinds of weird questions. Okay. Someone would say, Carolyn, I wanted to talk to you. It's about my mother. I said, okay, so tell me about your mother. She said, well, she lives in Oregon and she just loves to drive. I said, okay, tell me more. Well, I've been letting her go. She is legally blind. I'm just thinking, I wonder if we should, take the keys away. You asked me this question? Yeah. So that's a person who really was trying to go too far with allowing mom her independence. Legally blind, I'm sorry. I would have that request for retesting into the DMV Epic. And I would also let them know when I sent it in that she's legally blind, and I would ask the doctor to send one in too. But doctors vary. My mother-in-law was telling me yesterday about her 97-year-old friend Boris. Boris, 97, has fallen. He hit his head, he was on the floor for a day, it was horrible. He was bleeding, he had to go to the hospital, he came back. He decided he was going to live with his daughter and give up all this and stop driving. Doctor said, no more driving, Boris, you're done. Boris is what I'd call a stubborn old cuss. Boris changed his mind. He decided he didn't want to live with his daughter. He's going to have help at home. And he's going to find another doctor. And that doctor, that's why you can't count on the doctor all by yourself, the doctor said, well, I'm going to give you a vision test. If you can pass the vision test, then it's probably okay for you to drive. Come on, doctor. Let's get serious. So the driving issue is very problematic, and I think what we need to understand is that there are people, most people, who will willingly give up the keys as long as there's a way to get around, as long as it has been asked of them nicely and they feel that they have a choice. What I never advocate is sneaking the keys away, disabling the car without telling them, tricking them. I had a man come into my office once furious that his daughter had moved into his house and had taken his keys away. Well, this guy had a car collection, and yes, he did have what we call mild cognitive impairment. That can become dementia. Most of the time it does, sometimes it doesn't. He was impaired, but he was still a reasonably decent driver, better than some teenagers I know. I saw him in my parking lot. It's a dangerous age group. He was over 80. But to have taken the keys away without telling him, I don't know what his daughter was thinking, but he just went and had an upset night and then drove the car in rage wherever he was going. So that doesn't work. I think we need to be respectful of how important it is for people to have that freedom. I mean, think about it. How many people in here drive? Remember when you got your license? Remember that sense of independence? Yeah, I don't have to go with mom and dad anymore. I don't have to depend on anybody. I can go see my friends. That sense of freedom and independence that we sort of consider our right or our privilege, it is a privilege rather than a lockdown right. You have to qualify. That's what makes it a privilege. But that sense of freedom and independence belongs to us, and we identify with it, and we also don't want to be shut in the way my grandmother was, because we lose touch, we lose connection. But having the conversation about it needs to be honest, and it needs to be respectful. And if you can't get anywhere with that horribly stubborn older person, there's a 5-step plan in the book that will help you work your way through that. Okay, so I like to take questions before the end, so if anybody has one, please raise your hand. Yes, go ahead. You in the blue shirt.
I've been having a similar issue with the car.
Okay, yes. And who are we talking about? Who's the driver?
My mother.
Your mother,
Who's
okay.
87.
87?
And
Okay.
still pretty sharp,
Mhm.
but there are things that she can't do, like I've discovered a lot of older people can't turn their
Right.
necks
Right.
to look behind them, and so they tend to back out of spaces
Yes,
without looking.
that's right.
And we've gone through different phases. She's had a couple of falls where she's in the hospital. She had a little stroke. Her doctor said probably shouldn't be driving. We said, well, she's self-limit. She was starting to self-limit herself. And then lately, suddenly talking about driving down to Burlingame or driving up to Santa Rosa, and that is not self-limiting. That's, self-limiting is going over to the Mill Valley Post Office.
Right.
And so the back and forth part, deciding to do it.
Sure.
And we all congratulated her. This is great. You're making the decision yourself. And then finding as soon as my sisters go home and I'm at work most of the week when we're living together, that suddenly she gets itchy, and we applied for whistle stop, but it takes a long time
It does.
to get that, especially, and getting the negotiation I'm finding really difficult, because then you become an ogre for suggesting that
That's
maybe you're
right.
trying to do something that she's always been really good at.
That's right. And I think the pushback and the lashing out at the person who's trying to take their freedom away is something nobody wants to deal with. It's hard to be on the receiving end of that. But you gave me one clue, which is the doctor said you probably shouldn't be driving. And now, it's not easy to communicate with a doctor, right? Because they've got layers of protection in the office and they won't let you call them. But I think one way that I suggest some people do it, which does not always work because doctors are different, is to write a letter and say, look, my mother has had this, she's had that, she had a fall, she had it's the same doctor may not have treated her for all these things. You know how it's divided up. You got the cardiologist, we got the urologist, we got this person and that person. they don't necessarily communicate, nor do they see the same records. So you, as an advocate for her safety, have an opportunity. Wrap all that information that concerns you together. Write it down. This is why I think her driver's license should be taken away. I don't want to be the bad guy. Will you be the bad guy? Because that's part of your obligation as a physician. By the way, the American Medical Association has a requirement that doctors ask their patients about driving when they get to be a certain age. Guess what? They don't follow it. But it's there. So you might remind the doctor of that. But ask flat out, will you send a request for retesting to the Department of Motor Vehicles? Make it easy. Download it from the website and send it with the letter. Okay? When the doctor signs it, it has more weight. And if he doesn't want to tell her about it, he doesn't have to. But it needs to be done. And I'm going to tell you a scary story. This is a true story, okay? And I don't want to scare everybody here, but this is true. And it's really sad. And I want you to know about it when it comes to driving, because it needs to be really looked at. I talked to the daughter of a man who was visiting when we were down seeing my mother-in-law at the beach. They were next door. And she said, I'd like you to meet my father. I said, that's great. You know, I'm in the aging field. I mean, I'd like to get to know him. Tell me about him. She said, well, he's not in such good spirits. I said, tell me about that. Well, he had a stroke. And then a year later, and he couldn't drive, and then a year later he went to his doctor that he'd known for 35 years. And his doctor said, well, you look okay to me, I'll let you have your driver's license back. Now the risk of having another stroke when a person has had one stroke is 3 and 4. Okay, 3 and 4. Was that a smart move on the part of the doctor? This guy was a year older already. By this time he's like 84. This man had a stroke and killed his best friend in the driveway of his own apartment building.
Oh.
That's true, and I met him.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say take it seriously, I really mean take it seriously. It's not wait until something happens. The something that happens could be someone's life is gone.
Well, that's my newest argument. It's that, you know, it's not just you might injure yourself, it's you might hurt someone else.
Well, if you look in the book, there is a sort of intervention that I recommend too, if they absolutely will not listen. But you know, when you got peer pressure, most people, the majority of people will yield. You just have to make sure she can get around. If whistle stop doesn't work, maybe you hire one of those driver services where they come and take her to wherever she wants to get her hair done or whatever, you know. You don't want to cut her off from social life. That's part of the problem. Question?
In my opinion, I totally disagree with you. I would never turn somebody in like that. I think that's devastating to a person. It could drive them to commit suicide. Because I think when a person loses their license, they do begin to die. That is a very crucial part of their survival and their independence. It's their whole self-image. You might as well just shoot them and get it over with, you know? I wouldn't do that to anybody. I know that's me, and I really don't recommend that. I think that would be totally devastating to a person, and it's a total stab in the back. You know, I know it's true that there are some risks, but there are risks everywhere you go, and you know, whether you're in good health or not, you know, every day you drive on the road, you're taking a chance, you know. It's just, I could never turn somebody in like that, a loved one. That would totally kill them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess that's okay if they kill somebody else, but you know, everyone's entitled to an opinion, you know. Yes?
Well, actually, I don't have to worry about the driving problem because my mom fell down, broke her hip, and when she was doing her Kaiser, you know, when she did physical therapy, she was on her way to physical therapy and fell asleep at the wheel and slammed into a tree, totaled the car, broke a bunch of ribs, several other bones, and was in recovery then for that for a really long time. And was never able, even though she spent thousands of dollars on training, could never get her license back. She just couldn't pass the practical exam. She just got freaked out every time she got behind the wheel. So that's not a problem for me, but I'm just saying, that's the thing. She wasn't even that old. She was in her late 70s, I think, when it happened. Mm-hmm. It might even have been earlier, but she only learned when she was 59. Because she never, it was funny when you said get your driver's license. I had to get I didn't want a driver's license, but my father was the only member of the family who could drive, and he was a fireman, so he was gone 24 on, 24 off. So I had to learn to drive my mother everywhere. It wasn't my choice. Now I'm back to driving my mother everywhere, but at least she walks everywhere in town. My problem is, When do you know when it's time to do an intervention financially? Because where she is right now is, she writes checks for everything. She's starting to make mistakes on the checks. It's just the first tiniest occasional, she's having trouble balancing her checkbook occasionally. She won't let me look at anything, so she takes it to the bank for them to sort it out. But I'm going, she's totally fine otherwise. Mentally, she's sharp as a tack. At what point do I have to go in there and just start saying, we need to talk about this? Because she considers letting me handle any aspect of her finances as essentially just saying, here you go, I'm over, I'm a baby. And she just won't even consider it.
Okay, well, the short answer to when should you do it, the answer is now.
Now,
Right. The long answer is this, okay? People have varying levels of capacity in our lives. We may lose physical capacity, we may not. We may lose mental capacity slowly, we may not. When my grandmother, who I said lived to be 93, started making mistakes with her checkbook, her son took over. One of the first things to go when our brain begins to age in a dangerous way, with the beginnings of dementia, the beginnings of memory loss, the beginnings of impairment, brain disease, like heart disease, it just goes on, is that we lose our financial capacity. That is a really complicated thing. It's been studied and studied and studied and studied. And at the University of Alabama in Birmingham, Dr. Daniel Marson, who is a psychologist and a lawyer and the head of the neurology department there, has researched the effect of dementia on financial capacity. What he found is that in the very earliest stages of a person who has memory loss problems, financial capacity is already moderately impaired. And by the time you get to the middle stage of dementia, it's already severely impaired. So it doesn't track evenly. It is an early losing out part of the brain. Because it's so complicated, I mean, if you break it up into parts, there are like 9 of them. Checkbook management and bill paying are 2 of those. So the problem is, when people start losing track of being able to balance the checkbook, it's a red flag. The red flag says there's a process here that has to do with financial capacity for decision making that is beginning to erode. Now, what's the risk? The risk is financial elder abuse. Take a guess at how much elders in our country lose every year to financial elder abuse of any kind. Scams, overcharges on the credit card, internet thieves trying to say they're the Prince of Nigeria, you name it. Put it all together, take a wild guess at the number of dollars.
Billions.
$36.4 billion a year. That's a recent study done by a company called TrueLink, which has a product that helps you keep track of all your stuff. And of course, they want to sell their product. But I looked at who did the research, and it was researchers from Stanford. These are serious people. They weren't just playing around and trying to sell a product. And they didn't just look at what the federal government has, which says 2.9 billion is taken, which is, the big scams and the things that people report, or the things they can somehow keep track of. They delved into every little $20 magazine subscription that you didn't really want, but you don't know how to stop it because you're older and you don't get how that works. They drilled down into everything, and that's where they came up with this huge number. So, okay, so I say get involved because she's at risk for somebody taking advantage. Now here I have this 93-year-old, completely sharp, no dementia that I can see, and I'm pretty good at spotting it, mother-in-law, right? What has she done lately? She has the bad knees, right? There's a chiropractor in the area, Palm Desert, zillions of white-haired people walking around with wheelchairs and walking. Lots of them probably have pain. I will fix your knees. I will use, magical light therapy and whatever, hocus pocus. But when people are desperate enough, they will go for this. It's only $3,600 payable in advance, all right? It's not like she hasn't been through this before. She has. She's already been screwed over by one chiropractor. And we had to report into the chiropractic board. And so here she is, vulnerable. Not because she's got dementia, but because she's older, she's desperate for help. She saw a way out. This person is really nice and very compassionate and promised her a solution. That's how they hook you. That's just how they do it. So if you don't want her to get ripped off, here is a suggestion. You can offer to help her do the bills, but make sure you're standing there and she gets to sign the check. You could help her say, let me review all the things to make sure it balances. You could say, let me just look over it and then you can go for it, but I want to have an idea that nobody is trying to take advantage of you, because there are thieves out there. There are scammers out there. They're all about preying on people just like you. They're waiting for you. And it's true. If she resists, then you have to do the best you can. Sometimes people get, with a resistant parent, they'll get online access to the account. The parent doesn't even use a computer. And they will be able to see what's coming in and going out, even though they don't have access to change anything or write checks. But they'll at least know if there are all these $100 withdrawals to, Joe Blow, there's a suspicion there.
Don't you have to get permission or something at some point to do that? Because my mom is not online at all.
Yeah.
So if I had to do it, she's through Bank of Marin. I'd have to do it through Bank of Marin, but wouldn't I need to get a sign off from her?
You do. You do need to get permission, but you don't have to make a big deal about it. She doesn't have to do anything. You just have to get a password. But
I think she suspects something's up and she doesn't want me to see that she's having trouble.
Well, the trouble may have been that she's already been ripped off. And I will tell you, the impact of financial elder abuse is really serious. People are so ashamed that they have been taken advantage of, duped, made a fool of by some trickster. And they're so clever, these criminals. They're professionals at this. They make billions of dollars doing this, and they're really good at knowing who's vulnerable. But people get so embarrassed by this. They get depressed, they never forgive themselves. There have been suicides over that. That's recorded, So I think that it's something to really keep working on and keep trying and get anybody else you can to support the effort to just kind of partner with her. Many people are helping an elder pay their bills.
I'm going to buy your book for me, but would you recommend that I let her read it?
Absolutely.
I think maybe she would actually take it more seriously if she read your book than
Sure.
me telling her anything.
Yeah, I
At
mean,
this
if the
point.
lawyer part doesn't work, tell her I'm a nurse. I mean, whatever works.
Okay.
I just think that this gets the conversation going. I didn't write this just for the adult children. It's really for families. And if the elder can read it and get anything from it at all, great. I would be honored if somebody made one change because of that book. One change. I would be honored. I worked on it for that reason. I had another question here.
I was just gonna offer that, assuming you have a good relationship with your mother and you're not out to cheat her, I actually found the process of starting to supervise that easier, but you don't need the bank's permission. It just, you need their account number and you need their driver's license and
Right.
and
If you have the
then
information.
and then you can start to be a little helpful and you can print out a daily
Right.
statement for them.
They have to give the older person has to give you the account number though. That's the
They have to give you the account number. It's not that hard to get, and if you start showing how you could be helpful with it
Right.
in terms of printing out statements, that's how my mother started to say, "Can you pay this online?"
Oh,
That's a good suggestion. Can you pay this online?
Good.
And anyway,
Good, thank you for that. Question here.
Oh, I was going to suggest that they set up a family trust, and the trustee you can set up the accounts, and they all go under the name of the trust. And then you can have access to the accounts, and you can set them up online, you can set up automatic payment, and it makes your life a lot easier, you can see everything, and parents are a lot happier.
Family trust, yes, and that is a very good suggestion. And there is a problem sometimes with family trust, and this is one I run into a lot. Let me explain it. Anybody who's done estate planning probably has a family trust. That's a good way to get out of having to go to court after somebody dies and spend a whole bunch of money on lawyers proving the will. We call that probate. So the trust is a very good device for estate planning, even if you don't have a lot of money, to keep you from having to spend that after somebody passes. Okay. But lawyers who draft these trusts don't necessarily think all the way through what happens when somebody's in that gray zone between having capacity and being incapacitated. There's a long tail sometimes on the beginning of incapacity. It can be years. Alzheimer's disease, for example, can last from 6 to 20 years. During that time period, the decline might be like this, might be like this, might be like this. So, when you have an aging parent who is one of the trustees, and another person who is the co-trustee, maybe dad passed and the eldest son is the other trustee, you still have the elder in charge of making decisions and can veto anything. So the terms of how you get that person to either resign from being the trustee when they lose capacity to do it, or to get them out of that spot of authority when they should, is not so easy. Most of the time, the lawyer has written into the trust document that you've got to have 2 doctors declare them incapacitated for handling their financial affairs or something to that effect. Great. Good luck getting them to go to the doctor when they think they're fine. It's not the best device. There are other ways to do it, and I talk to lawyers about this a lot, but it's problematic because there are people who, as we mentioned at the beginning, do not know that they're impaired. It's called anosognosia. It's just a term that says, you know, your brain is so, it's like Swiss cheese, and the part of you that can logically think through things is not working, so you don't know you have dementia. So you think everything's great, and why should you let someone else take over the trust? Or anything, because you're fine, you feel great. They'll tell you that. So this is a difficulty, and you know, short of going to court, it's not a very easy path to negotiate with someone who thinks they're fine when they're not. But that is a very good point, that a trustee, a co-trustee, has equal access to the trust and can then, if necessary, take the money out and put it in a safe place so the impaired elder can't get to it and can't give it to the Prince of Nigeria. And you leave them enough in that checking account so they can have a good time and go get their hair done or their card game or whatever it is they do. But they're not vulnerable to abuse by giving away large sums of money. And I have talked to people whose parents have disposed of, through scams, hundreds of thousands of dollars, unchecked by the family because they wouldn't give up the trusteeship. Okay, another question.
Yeah, I know your book is on aging parents, but
Yes.
what if it's the individual themselves that's aging and they don't have parents, they don't have children, and the relatives that you have are older and will probably die sooner than they?
Right.
So what do you do in a case like that?
The question is really about what you do for somebody who doesn't have children, doesn't have anybody they can trust, and their only relatives are as old as they are, and they're probably going to die before the person in
Or
question.
they're very stubborn.
Oh yes, of course, we have to have stubborn in the
Yeah,
mix,
stubborn
right?
and independent. yeah.
Stubborn has got to go in that mix. Okay, well, there is such a thing as a licensed professional fiduciary. That is a person that the state of California at least licenses. They have to have basic training in money management. They have to have basic skills to pass the licensing test. They have a legal responsibility to do what is in the best interest of the elder. And if all else fails, and there is nobody else, a friend that you could really trust, then this is a paid person who will handle the bill paying, the trust obligations if there is one, even all the way to the end of life. They can be the person appointed on the healthcare director that makes sure you don't have things done you don't want, or that you get what you want, vice versa. And I have worked with a number of fiduciaries. I will say be a really good consumer if you need to use one, because the quality varies. And although they are licensed in the state of California, they are not licensed to have common sense about human problems. They're licensed to handle money. They sometimes insert themselves into family conflicts, much to the detriment of the people involved. That's not their role. Sometimes they take sides. Sometimes they just don't know what they're doing when it comes to the relationships. So that is a risk. I would be sure that if you do need to have someone appointed for anybody, that you check their credentials very carefully, that you talk to somebody who's had them as the fiduciary before, so that you know what you're dealing with.
Is that something your firm can refer a good?
I can find somebody a good
Because
fiduciary.
I've heard of horror stories.
There are
as well.
horror stories, to be sure, and I have personally seen some of them. One person created such a mess, it's been several months, it has not yet been cleaned up. Because a mom and a son were fighting, and the daughter was trying to help the mom stay in her home, and the son wanted to take her and move her to some foreign place and sell her house so he could get the money. And It was awful, and the mom and the daughter had gotten a competent attorney to appoint a fiduciary and get this straightened out so somebody neutral will be handling the money. And what does the fiduciary do? She calls the son.
Oh,
Yeah, just blew the whole thing, messed it up, had to start over, get another lawyer, another fiduciary. It was awful. So that's why I say be a good consumer. A license does not mean they've got common sense.
is there some kind of Angie's List for fiduciary?
No, there isn't. There is the Professional Fiduciaries Association of California, PFAC. I've talked to their folks at one of their conventions, and there were like 100 people that filled the room. We were talking about dementia and aging clients. So they're hungry for more data on that. I've been invited to work with them to help educate their fiduciaries a little bit better about some of the issues we're talking about here, because they get sucked into them. If they're in charge of the money, they get sucked in.
What's the website again?
It's Professional Fiduciaries Association of California, PFAC. The website is just okay, but I do know a few good ones that I think would be useful. It's sort of like a blind date, though. You want to match the person with the right subject so they get along, and I've been successful in doing that, actually, with a very stubborn older German lady, and her financial advisor was overstepping his bounds, shall we say, and she had a son who was an alcoholic. So there you have an older person with nobody to trust. The financial advisor had swept all of her records away from her, so she didn't even know what she had anymore, treating her like she was an idiot, made himself the power of attorney. Little conflict of interest there, would you say?
How did he do that without her signature?
Oh, he just did it because he had enough signatures on other things that he decided to do that. He told her it was for her own good. When she found out what happened, it was a nightmare. So I did find her a very good fiduciary, and she trusted that person, and that lady, stayed with her till the end of her life. And in fact, I think stayed on and was helping the son after mom died. That's a competent person. But it costs money. You gotta pay them, $100 an hour, something like that.
And so what was the term, license?
Professional fiduciary. Fiduciary. And I mention it in the book. It talks about what they do, but it doesn't talk about how to really find one. So that's another issue for you. Any other questions over here? Yes.
So when we're talking about kind of being in between competent and incompetent, I feel like my mom's in that stage right now. She's actually quite forthcoming to me of issues that she has when she doesn't balance the checkbook every month. Very willing to let me do those types of things.
Great.
But then when I come up with suggestions, she's not so willing. Or she has excuses or what have you. And so, in certain respects, I've been trying to respect so that she can kind of make the decisions, but at the same time, I don't want the issue with driving. I don't want that. I don't want her to kill herself. I don't want her to kill somebody else. She's really big into whatever that, where you can call in and win money.
Oh my
If
gosh.
you make the purchases,
Oh God.
whatever, Publishers Clearinghouse. So, I mean, she spends a good couple hundred, maybe $400 or $500 a month with them. And, I keep bringing that up with her, and she keeps saying she's gonna stop next month, And then I talked to her about she lives down in Southern California, going down to UCLA Memory Clinic and getting tested for the Alzheimer's or dementia or, what have you. And she keeps kind of skirting around that. So I'm just trying to, I don't want to just make the appointment and take her down. I will if I need to pretty soon, because I just don't know if she's making poor decisions or if she's just becoming unable to make good decisions.
Well, you've touched on what's a very common problem for people in families, because you have a person who's partly competent. They might seem socially very appropriate. Maybe they like the Giants and they can tell you the score of the last game, and whatever their favorite thing is, they're quite competent to get in that groove and talk about that. But you're already seeing damage in other areas that is there. You can't deny it, it's true. She shouldn't be driving, or she shouldn't be handling the checkbook. As long as she is willing to let you help all you can.
Which I do.
People change their minds. Now, my mother-in-law, you know, living by herself in the big house, she finally sold that, downsized, thank you, Mom, and got rid of bazillions of possessions. I think there were 60 pairs of shoes. Not that she's a hoarder, but there was a lot of stuff, and I bless her for saving us from having to do that after she's gone. Her solution to the I shouldn't live in this big house by myself was to rent a smaller house and live by herself. And I thought, well, okay, first she decided she was going to go to a seniors community with assisted living in it, you know, independent apartment, and they have assisted living. Those are great because you can like change when you need to. And we, you know, tried to assert our sort of wisdom that we thought we had, and she straightened us out that it's her life and she's going to do what she wants, and she will tell us when she's ready, thank you, and don't push her. So, you know, my husband's a psychologist. He knows how to put things to people really gently. He was so respectful. He was like, thank you, I'll tell you when I'm ready. So we couldn't get her to do that. And then about 2 months ago, out of the blue, now she's on a lease for this little house, which is very cute and suits her needs beautifully. She calls him up and says, well, I've decided to move. What? I've decided to move. I think I need to be around other people in some place where help is nearby. He goes, Mom, that's great. What changed your mind? And I did do a little video of her on this if you want to see it. It's great. It's like 4 minutes. I have a blog on Forbes called Aging Parents, and it's the latest blog on aging parents. So anyway, she was trying to change the light bulb above her desk. My husband taught her how to use a computer when she was 86. After her husband died, and she learned, so she can pay her bills. She wants to be independent. But she could not, she has arthritis in her hands, and she could not get the light bulb unscrewed because of this. And she was so annoyed and so frustrated that did it. But it wasn't as if nothing else had happened before that. When I interviewed her for the little video, I said, you know, how did you come to this decision? And she said, well, you know, you take a lot of things for granted as you get older. Seeing, walking, being able to pick up a grocery bag, doing things for yourself. And she said, it's just getting harder. And here's the part that I loved. Bless you, Mom. She said, I didn't want to become a burden to my children. Thank you, that would be me. And I wanted to do what was best for everyone. And even though I love the desert, and I'll miss the people, and my card games, and the things that I'm used to doing here, I think it's time. Thank you, Mom. We wanted to celebrate and have a party because it was such a good thing, and she has embraced this. But again, this is a person who will adapt well to community life because she's not shy. She was an only child. She had to move around a lot when she was a kid, and so she had to make new friends at new schools. So that skill that she had 80 years ago, she's pulling that up right now. And she told my husband, I'm scared, when she made the decision. And he said, Mom, what do you think you're scared about? What's going on? And she said, I don't know. Then she called him back and she said, I thought about it. I know what I'm scared about. She said, it was having to go to a new school every time and make new friends. And she said it was awful. It was really scary for me. But she said, now that I figured it out, I'm fine. God bless you, Alice. So, you know, we have it easy, and we have it easier than a lot of people because we're not dealing with dementia too. But let me say a few words about dementia before I close, and then if there's time for another question or two at the end, we'll do that. This is the worst disease I have seen. Why? Because it steals the person by degrees from you. It steals their mind. It does not steal their body. In the early stages, they seem to be fine, and people can care for themselves. But when they begin to lose the ability to do things they've always done, one of my friends told me her father forgot how to make coffee. Now there's a clue. Those grooves that the habitual actions have set in place for many years, they start to go. There's erosion. A doctor once described it as the brain's like Swiss cheese. There are holes. You can still get across certain parts, but there are holes. That's the damage done by the destruction of brain cells. And when that happens, that ability cannot be retrieved. The mind can try to find a way around it. If you can't remember jacket, you say that thing I put on when I'm cold. And a person with dementia will do that. They lose the ability to do things, to say words, to find things. But they also lose the ability, to your point, to make safe decisions. Because the frontal lobe of the brain, where we have our judgment, this is where we make judgments, right here in the cortex. That part starts to go quick. That's where financial decision-making lives too. And that's why that goes first. We don't know why, we don't know how dementia starts, we don't know how to stop it, we can't slow it down. It's awful. But I think what we need to do is just respect and honor how difficult a disease it is, not for us being around somebody who's got it, but for the person who has it. Really terrifying to start losing control. I don't know if any of you saw the movie Still Alice.
I did, yeah.
They did an excellent job portraying what it's like from the inside.
The book is good too.
Yes.
It really describes the
Yes.
inner working.
I can tell you two things about dementia that I hope you will remember if anyone you know ever develops it, or if someone you know has it or is developing it now. Two things. Music works beautifully. There have been research studies about people who got really stubborn and would not take a bath. And they did a fairly small study, but it was a profound study in my view. They played music, these favorite kinds of music for these people, before the shower, and they got them to take a shower. It just seems to change mood. Why? Inside the brain, in the middle part, the limbic system where our emotions live, that doesn't get so damaged by dementia, maybe not at all. So people still feel things and respond to things that are positive to them, like music, okay? The other is touch, okay? Now there are people who get demented and they have hallucinations and they're not in reality contact anymore and they don't respond to touch normally, but most people, and there's a study, most people respond to light touching of the arm. So if you need to calm someone with dementia, try that. And I learned that from my first year nursing school instructor who taught me, because I was going to take a job in a nursing home for the summer after my first year. And she said, Carolyn, these people can't see so well, they can't hear so well, they can't think so well, and you've got to be there every day taking care of them, doing something like changing bedpans or the sheets or whatever you do as a nurse's aide with 1 year of nursing school. She said, remember touch. Touch them gently, because that they will respond to.
I have a friend who's 87 who's in a senior citizen place that she has dementia and it's getting quite bad, but she had 2 cats that they allowed her to take in there. And she told me the other day she wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for the 2 cats. And they're constantly, on her and around her,
That's fabulous. I really am a believer in pets. And it was only, fairly recently in our history of having nursing homes that we allowed animals in there. First, they could just come in and visit, and they still do, but now they allow people to actually keep a pet, if it's that kind of facility, and assisted living as well. People do better. If they love their pets, they do better. Of course, they might trip over them too, but we have to weigh the risks and benefits, don't we? Question?
With my dad specifically, he seems to slowly be getting dementia, but he has diabetes. I worry about the crisscrossing of those 2 things.
Yeah.
How it's managed.
Well, you raise a good point. Diabetes is a predisposing factor for dementia. It increases the risk, and we're not exactly sure why, but it has something to do with the metabolism of sugar in the brain, which they think, because that's altered in diabetes, is something that causes dementia to happen more frequently in people who have diabetes. They will continue to manage the diabetes for him with medication, whether he takes it orally or he takes insulin, for as long as he's alive. They will do that. Because people then, without their medication or without insulin, they will go into either insulin shock or diabetic coma. It goes to one extreme or the other, too much, not enough. But it's not really something that's going to change the course of treatment for diabetes because he has dementia. There's nothing they can really do to treat dementia except be kind to people and keep them safe. That's the best. And of course, help them enjoy. Art works really well. People can draw when they can't talk. People can sing when they can't remember how to speak. It's amazing what the brain does in those inner regions where our emotions live. But, you've got a long road ahead of you. I'm hoping that you find courage through it. Yes?
Speaking of that, so I've been reading something about that cardiac health can affect the mental health or the dementia, so untreated cardiac issues. My mother is 94. She seems to be sleeping a lot, like 12 hours at a time. Is that, there's some connection there?
Sure. The Buck Center on Research and Aging here in our county is the only freestanding independent research facility on aging in the country. It's not connected to a university, it's not paid by anybody, it's not funded by a drug company. It's really got some excellent research going on, and they are going against the grain of the common theories about what causes dementia. People think, or Alzheimer's specifically, people think it's, being invaded by plaques and tangles, plaques and tangles in the brain. They think it's not that, they think that's an effect, that it's really an inflammatory disease. Cardiovascular disease is an inflammatory disease as well, okay? So there's probably a relationship. Yeah, there is a relationship between all inflammatory diseases, some doctors think. We'll see.
Just FYI, my great aunt is sharp as a tack. She's in her mid-90s. Every once in a while, she gets really goofy, and they figured out it's UTIs. It's urinary tract infections, because in elderly people, urinary tract infections are painless, essentially, but it makes the person absolutely loopy, and they can show all the signs of really radical dementia. And then they get their antibiotics and they get taken care of in the hospital, and it goes away really, really fast. But a lot of times now people are going, oh my God, my mom's just gone around a bend or had a stroke, and it turns out it's a UTI. So always make sure they check for a UTI first.
Does everybody understand that urinary tract infection?
Yeah,
You're
they're
absolutely right.
really weird compared to
You're
when
absolutely
we,
right.
at this age, get a
Yes.
urinary tract infection. It's like a completely different thing. It's completely different.
Yeah, it does something very different to the brain of an older person.
Yeah.
And nobody knows why, but it's one of the dangers of nursing homes, and one of the reasons I put a chapter in there about how to choose a nursing home is because a lot of times somebody's got to go there for, after surgery, maybe not necessarily to live there, but they have to go there for some reason, even for a short time, and they can be very dangerous places. I have worked in nursing homes as a nurse's aide. I have worked in nursing homes as a nurse, and I have sued nursing homes as a lawyer. So I have a few words to say about nursing homes, which are in there. But one of them is watch out for dehydration in a nursing home. That water pitcher better be full, and that person better be asked to drink a lot. Because if not, they risk not only urinary tract infections or UTIs, but lots of other problems too.
Yeah.
But that was a very good point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Because they're sneaky.
Okay, yes.
Do you have we've got time for one more question.
One more question.
Do you have a practice, or do you work here in Marin?
I do. I have a consulting practice. My husband and I, he's a psychologist, as I mentioned. We have agingparents.com, which is a service for people who have questions about aging loved ones or aging issues of whatever kind. We, charge by the package. It's usually 4 hours, and sometimes we get together with families. Sometimes we sort out family conflicts. Sometimes we just walk you through the problem of trying to get the keys away or whatever it is you're trying to do. We're here to help you. I want to use these years and years of experience to lighten somebody's burden. That's what it's for. That's what motivates me, helping you. All right, I think we'll wrap it up.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.